Okay, well, we're going to get underway. Thank you all for being here today. This is Eric Parker with One Number, and we're getting kicked off here with the Using Tableau Prep on Dirty Data webinar. It's going to be kind of a quick webinar. You know, most of our webinars don't run more than half an hour. The reason for that is because, well, we all have short attention spans, first of all. But second, we just want to give you some high-level details about how something works. So we're going to be talking about today is Tableau's new product, Tableau Prep. You probably heard about it. We're going to talk about it in just a little bit. Of course, I know a lot of you from classes and projects that I've worked on over the last several years, but for those that I don't, it's a real quick introduction. I live in Seattle, been working with Tableau, teaching it, using Tableau Prep now kind of in the background for 4 years, Tableau Prep for 6 months of that. And yeah, been teaching classes, working on customized projects, building out workshops, and just trying to help people get more value out of the tools they already have. And I think the exciting thing about Tableau Prep having come out last month is that for anybody who had Tableau Desktop, you've automatically got a license of this. So it's a new tool at your disposal, and hopefully what we'll do here today is show you some ways that you might be able to use it to make your life easier. Right? So first off, just a quick introduction to Tableau Prep if you didn't make the last webinar or you're just kind of getting underway with this new tool. It's an ETL or extract, transform, and load tool, which is basically a nerdy way of saying taking data that may be in a variety of structures and a variety of places with how clean it is, and turning it into something intelligible for a tool like Tableau to be able to consume and then be able to build reports off of. And so you might be wondering, okay, when would I need something like that? And the reason that Tableau built Tableau Prep is because Tableau was engineered originally to be a data visualization tool, right? It was supposed to take clean data that was already structured in an organized way and then turn it into meaningful visuals. But what's happened over time is folks at Tableau have realized that most data isn't just kind of clean out the gates, and you're going to have potentially multiple data sources. Maybe they have different structures, different fields, things like that. And to be able to bring it all together, it might take more than just what the tools in Tableau Desktop can already do. And so if you've been using Tableau Desktop, you know that it can do some things like basic joins and unions and pivots. And we actually just did a webinar a couple weeks ago about what Tableau Prep can do that Tableau Desktop can't. So we won't be recovering all of that by any means, but it's got some functionality like the ability to union data sources or tables from 2 different data sources that Tableau Desktop can't necessarily do. So let's go ahead and dive in here and talk about what this whole webinar is about, which is using this new tool, Tableau Prep, to clean up messy data. And we're going to run through 6 different scenarios and just look at some of the built-in features that Tableau Prep has that might help you avoid having to do more manual or intensive processes in Excel or wherever you might be cleaning up data right now. So here's a list of them. We're going to talk about what happens when you've got misspellings in your data, maybe abbreviations like Washington State versus WA. We're going to look at how to clean up things like leading and trailing spaces. We'll talk about what to do when your fields, the actual data that you have, has different structures. What happens when you have 2 tables at different levels of granularity or aggregation. So maybe you have like one table that's got daily information and another table that has monthly information. How do you get them to play nicely together? And the last thing that we'll wrap up with before taking some time for questions at the end of the day will be how to address different column names when you're trying to bring multiple data sources together. Alrighty, so we'll start off with misspellings. And it's got a kind of a quick list here of some cities in Washington State. So for those that are not in the state, you might recognize some of those, like, of course, Seattle, maybe Spokane. For those of you that are in the state, you'll notice the things like Puyallup, and there are a couple others that look like they got cut off here. And At least if you live in Washington, you've met people from outside of it, and you've heard them try and pronounce Puyallup. You know that could be a challenge if you're not from here, but it could also be a challenge to spell that, or other cities, getting kind of the right spelling. So let's say you're working with data where people are going to be doing manual inputs, right? So they're typing in the city of Bellevue, but they don't know which spelling, and now it's up to you to clean all this stuff up. And this is just a couple isolated scenarios. That's usually something that you can kind of just do manually. But when you're talking about a whole bunch of issues like this, it's nice to have a tool that can maybe help you figure that out a little bit faster. You may have heard about a term called fuzzy matching before. This is kind of along the same lines, maybe just a little bit less robust. So what I'm going to do is flip over to Tableau Prep. I've got it up and running already. For this first example, I'm going to connect to a data source for the first time. For the rest of them, just to save time, I've already got the data sources preloaded for us. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and add a connection. You'll see that when you go to add a connection, this window looks really similar to Tableau Desktop, just a more limited set of data sources that you can connect to at this point. They're going to be adding new data sources to connect to with every release. So if you don't see yours here, you might still be okay. It might be coming down the road here shortly. So I've just set everything up in Microsoft Excel to make life really simple today. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and grab an Excel file for us to work with. And yeah, so let's say you're working for a bank and you've got a set of data, and it's about contestations that people have had. So maybe they had a charge in their credit card they didn't recognize, and you're trying to figure out if there's any sort of maybe geographical trends to this data. Are these things all happening in the city of Seattle, or on the east side, or the eastern side of the state, or is it maybe just kind of a general mix of the three? So once you've connected to a data source, you're going to want to grab whatever table that you want from that data source and drag it in here. So we'll start with this table called Open Cases. And you'll see the Tableau just gives you this preview right here. It's just going to be your field names, and then maybe just kind of a quick idea of what some of the values are in that field. If you want to get to a point where you're starting to actually manipulate your data, being able to see it in more detail, what you can do is actually hit this plus button next to your table name, and just to view the data and start making some basic changes, like calculated fields and things of that nature. So I'm going to hit this Add Step. Okay, and so when I hit Add Step, I'm going to get this preview data pane down here, and it starts to go into a lot more detail. First of all, I've got some histograms to be able to see where my data is concentrated. So I can see that the most issues are happening in Seattle, followed by Spokane. You've got some kind of cool abilities. If you, select a specific city, you can actually highlight, relevant, in this case, names, or I don't know, amounts over on the right side. And down at the bottom of the screen, it's a little bit cut off right now, but you can actually see, the original data as well. Okay, so back to the task at hand. We've got some different spellings for all kinds of different cities here, and what we need to do is somehow start cleaning them up. And so, kind of like what you can do from within Tableau Desktop, I could just select multiple of these fields and group them together. But the reality is that that's going to be a bit of work because I've got multiple cities that I need to do this for. So in a scenario like this, where the spellings are close but maybe just off, and the phonetics are going to be generally the same, what I could do is hit this drop down here, go into Group and Replace, and rather than trying to pick everything manually, maybe I'm going to try and go off of something like pronunciation. Okay, so I hit pronunciation here. Tableau does a little work on the back end, has some additional software installed. I'm blanking on the name right now that it uses to be able to do this. But what I can see now, if I select one of these cities like Bellevue, I'll get to see what members that Tableau grouped together on the back end. So this is always a good idea when you're doing groupings like this for the first time, just because you just want to make sure that Tableau didn't throw something in there that it shouldn't have. Like if we had CTAC and Seattle's phonetics will be a bit different, but it's possible it could be in there. Okay, so actually let's take note of something like Tacoma here. Notice that Tacoma with a C and Tacoma with a K were both picked up and grouped automatically, but Tahoma was not with an H, right? And the reason for that would just be that the phonetics are different. So if I want to add Tacoma to this Tacoma grouping, what I'm going to do is go back to this Tacoma group, scroll down, just put a check next to that as well, and I'll group it going forward. Okay. So once you're feeling good about where that data is at, let's say that we didn't need to make any other changes, you would go ahead and go through, add an output. And what an output allows you to do is to pick a specific place where you want to save your files. Maybe I send it to my desktop, and you can also pick what you want the extension to be. So it could be a hyper or TDE file if you're going to use it within Tableau, or if for some reason maybe you're going to be using it somewhere outside of Tableau, you can always export it as a CSV as well. Okay. So that's scenario one. I think the next few scenarios will start to go a little bit faster since we won't be doing some more of the basics of prep. So moving into scenario two here, we've got abbreviations. So we're working with a data source, like you can see in this image. And that green data source, Alaska, is spelled out all the way. From the magenta data source, it's just listed as AK. Right? So to go ahead and dive into this, I think the right one here. Yeah, all right. So we've got our two data sources. In this case, you're doing some kind of income analysis. So you've got a whole bunch of people, what kind of jobs they do, and you just want to better understand how people in specific states stack up against the per capita income for that state. So here's the individuals, this orange data source, and then here's the per capita income in my blue data source. So what we're going to do here actually to bring this together is called a join. You've been using Tableau Desktop or maybe some sort of data prep tool before this, a join might feel pretty familiar already. If you haven't, but you've been using Excel, kind of the closest cousin within Excel that most people are familiar with is called a VLOOKUP. So it's the ability to find a match based on a value in a row. And then in this case, we're going to be taking two tables and kind of adding them together horizontally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this orange data source and hover over my blue table until I see this section that says new join. I see that I'm going to drop this table up here. Right. Tableau starts to build this thing, and here's what I get is I'll see there's kind of a whole lot going on here. Right now I've just got an inner join selected. I've just got the center point of that Venn diagram highlighted. And I can see that from the blue data source, 44 rows were included in the join, 7 weren't. From the orange data source, 884 were, 116 were not. And then if I look over to the right side here, I can just kind of see a quick view of what data did not match. So any field that's red, like Florida or Alaska here, those did not find a match. So you could even just do something simple like show only mismatched values to see what those were. So if you look at that orange data source, you'll see that in 2 of the 3 cases, in both Florida and Alaska, there actually is a match over there. It's just different abbreviations. And then District of Columbia, this one's a little bit different. There's just actually not a row of data for District of Columbia. So this is going to be, maybe get drawn no matter what. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and scroll through the data on the right here. And what I'm able to do in this case, see if I can track it down. Actually, here's something I can do to make this even simpler. Right now, I'm looking at all of the data from the join results, but what I could do is just select like, hey, I just want to see these 116 rows from this orange data source that didn't match. And when I select that bar, it's actually going to pull up only that data. So for instance, here's Florida. And so what you can do in Tableau Prep is just within this data pane down here, you just double click on a field and actually change what it is across the whole data source. So just like with Tableau Desktop, this isn't going back to my Excel file and actually changing the values there. But what it is doing is changing the way that Tableau Prep and eventually Tableau Desktop will see this. So as I make these changes, those are actually getting made at this previous step back here. And when I go now back to my join clause, I'll see that a whole bunch more of the rows match. So now I went from like 800 something up to 972 matching. And it looks like the only thing not matching now from my orange data source is just District of Columbia. in, create an output, send it to Tableau, visualize, make things look good, do your thing. Okay, so dealing with things like leading and trailing spaces. So you look at this example here on the screen, and you can see that we're trying to match social security numbers. The social security numbers that we're trying to match in this case do exist in both data sources. However, in one data source, I don't remember which one, they've got leading and trailing spaces, and the other they don't. So sorry about that. I'm going to talk myself out of a job here. All right, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and join these two tables together. The same general thing I was doing last time, except for, again, notice I've got some issues with matches not lining up. So this is 101.62.9853. It's also right here. I've just got this issue of either a leading or a trailing space. It's kind of hard to tell, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back to this clean step here. And actually, I can see it now better in this view. You see this social security number here. It's got a space in front of it. So what I'm going to do is hit the drop down, top right of this field. And there's this section called clean. A whole lot of things you can do here, changing uppercase and lowercase and things like that. But what I'm going to do is just go ahead and select trim spaces. That's going to clean up leading and trailing spaces. So I should be able to go through to my join now. And as long as there aren't leading or trailing spaces coming out of that blue data source, I should see all my data match up. And notice now we've got something different in this join dialog over here, which is that 1,000 rows in my blue data source matched up with 1,000 rows in my orange data source. Right? And so with this data, you're not always going to have every single row match, and that might be okay. Depends what you're working with. But in this case, we would want to see all those rows match up. So that's actually a really good sign for us right there. Alrighty, so different data structures. So in this case, what we're looking at are two different tables. And you can see in this image here, the member demographics table, that blue one, has just got a customer first name, last name. The orange data source has a first name, middle initial, last name. So they're close, but they're not exact. And of course, Tableau Prep, just like Tableau Desktop, wants exact matches down to the individual character level. So those fields are not able to be joined on just yet. Okay. So again, here are my two data sources. And in this case, what I'm going to want to do is just kind of think through the rules, how this data is set up, and what I can do to maybe allow this orange data to match the blue data. So the blue data is a bit simpler. It's just a first name, last name. Orange data has got the initial. So what I'm going to do is actually create a calculated field here to come up with a name field that just has a first name, last name. Here's probably the simplest way of doing this is I'm going to create two different splits. So my first split is going to be go under split values and custom split. This is just like the split functionality in Tableau Desktop, or very similar to text to columns in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and say that a space is my separator and just get the first one field or the first column. Okay, so there's name split one. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the last name. And space is my separator. I'm going to go to the last field. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is to create a calculated field combining both these. And if I want to rename these, obviously that's just fine to do that. Just going to do that as I go if that's going to help me to remember what's what. I'm going to right click on this column, create a calculated field. And I'll just call this, if I call it name, it might not like that. So I'll just put name with a space after it. And I'm going to go, or maybe even to make this easier, no middle initial. Okay, so I'm going to say first name, and then this is kind of like concatenate in Excel, plus a space, plus last name. Okay, so there's my cleaned up name field. If I want to leave all these other columns, I can, but in this case, it might actually be nicer to actually just remove them, not deleting them forever or anything. But what it's doing is taking them out of the flow. I can always bring them back if I need to, kind of see the changes I've made, and undo the remove fields or something like that. But in this case, that is actually probably going to make my life a bit simpler. So now I'm going to go ahead and go in my two tables here, and see. Tableau is smart enough to figure out that name should match with the field name, no middle initial. Oh, actually, maybe it wasn't. We'll have to add that ourselves. All right, take it back. So what we're going to need to do is just indicate what the join clause is going to be. Say, okay, name, no middle initial is equal to name. And then, hey, all 30 rows from both data sources are going to work out for us. All right, so a couple more scenarios to work through. The next one will be different aggregation levels. This is that scenario we talked about where maybe you have one table that's daily and one table that's monthly or something like that. So in this scenario, you're working for a restaurant chain, and on the one hand, you have some high-level information. It's just one record per store per day. It tells how many exceptions occurred, like how many meals were comped, things like that, and what the amount refunded was. And here's something I want to point out is you might have noticed that Tableau Prep is creating these histograms on numeric-based fields. And what it's trying to do is show you a distribution of your data. So, for instance, there were 17 times that 18 exceptions occurred in a day, right? But if you ever want to see those individual values, what you can always do is just right-click on a field and go from summary, which is going to be that histogram, to detail. They're going to be whatever those individual values are. So in the case of date, I'm going to click on that field and go to detail. What I'll see is that there is 5 rows of data for every date, and there are also 5 entities. And if I cycle through these, I'll see that there's always consistently just one row of data per entity per date. So this is just kind of a daily snapshot. Now I go through this data. This is going to be, looks like some sales information. And so if I want to see how many records per day there were here, same general idea. I'm going to go from summary to detail. But in this case, I'll see that it's kind of random. There's 848 rows on that day, 1,144 on this day, and so on. So this data source is transactional, meaning that every single transaction that occurred at a restaurant is a row of data here. Okay. So what I want to do in this case is, if I want to just kind of get a daily snapshot of each store, how much did they sell on this day? How many exceptions were there? How much was refunded? What I'm going to do actually is add what's called an aggregate step to this more detailed table. And think about this kind of like a pivot table in Excel if you haven't really used something like an aggregation tool before, or a group by in SQL or something like that. And so what this is going to let me do is say, okay, I want to see for each date and each entity a sum of the quantity and sales and profit. Okay, and so what we're going to end up dropping in this process is we're going to end up dropping the individual items that we sold. So we're not going to know if they were burgers or shakes or fries or things like that, but we're going to get is just some more high-level numbers. And so what I'm going to do from here then, now join these together. Okay, should match on entity. I might need to match on something like date as well. Okay, and notice this is a good sign. So I've got the same number of rows in each data source, 150 in the blue and 150 in the orange. So there's 1 month's worth of data, 1 record per store per day. Looks like just about all of them matched up. I do have a few that excluded. I'm going to guess more than likely that was my own issue setting the data up. So let's assume this is good, sweep it under the rug, and move on to our last example. All right, different column names. So let's say that you are merging together several different tables. and you have fields with different names that you do actually end up wanting merged together. And so what a union is it's basically stacking two tables on top of each other vertically. So in this case, say you're working for a casino, doing some analysis, and you're trying to just kind of understand your players, which of them are playing slots, poker, betting on sports now maybe, since that's apparently legal. And what we're going to be doing is trying to basically understand the tendencies of each player and how much overlap there is across different types of betting. So for whatever reason, the types of betting are set up in different tables. And so what we're going to do is union them all together. Okay. I'm going to get the second table and union it to the first. And if I want to add yet another table to that union, so in this case betting to the poker slots union, what I'm going to do is have this other table, and instead of doing a new union, which is actually going to create a second union tool, I'm actually going to add it to the existing union. It's kind of more like a union all in this case. And notice any field that was the same throughout each of these three tables just lined up automatically. So we got kind of a rainbow going on under player ID. We've got magenta, orange, and blue. But in the case of the date fields like slot date, poker date, and bet date, those did not line up. So to simplify this, I'm just going to search the fields for dates. And what I'm going to do here is actually control select these three fields and tell Tableau that, hey, these actually should be merged together. Merge them all. Maybe I even give one a new name. And then I am off to the races from there. Okay, so in conclusion, since we're kind of coming up on the end of our half an hour here, what did we learn? Well, we learned that data's messy, of course, but we already knew that. And what we also learned is that Tableau Prep has got a variety of different tools and abilities to be able to handle that messy data. So you might be wondering, okay, that was like a helpful intro. Where can I learn more about this? We're going to continue to do webinars and blogs about it. So, you know, 5 minutes here, 20 minutes there satiates your appetite. That's great. If not, if you really want to learn more and you think this is something you're going to end up using, I am pasting a link into the chat right now. I encourage you to check out. We're going to be hosting a workshop next week, actually. It's virtual. It's going to run Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, and Thursday morning Pacific time. So all 3 days. And we're going to be doing a deep dive into Tableau Prep, starting from the ground up. So what is this tool? How does it work? What are some of the building blocks? And it's going to, the last day, it's just going to be you working with a whole bunch of data, trying to cobble it all together and make it work, and actually getting to spend some time on your own data as well and ask questions. So it's going to be a really great time. Would definitely encourage you to sign up for that if that you think that could be helpful. In the meantime, you know, we're up at the half an hour here, so if you have to jump, totally understand. If there are any immediate questions, feel free to type those into the questions box, and I'll be able to see them, and we'll just take a couple minutes here to answer anything that you might have. So I've got a first question up, which is, can Tableau Prep connect to SharePoint lists? And I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. What I'm going to do is just do a quick double check of the Tableau Prep connections. I'm not seeing that right now, so I guess that's not available. But since it's in Tableau Desktop, I would be pretty willing to bet that that's something that they're going to be working on here in short order. Okay, here's the next question is, can you put the join data as the output or the result of the union, or join as the output file? Let me read that one more time. Can you put the join data as the output or the result of the union or join as the output file? Oh, I see what it's saying. Yes. Yeah. So if you want, you know, I just did this join or, you know, union or any combination of them. Yeah. And you can actually output all that stuff as well. So that's part of one of the great powers of all of this is the ability to take multiple steps to prepare your data and then output it all together. Yeah. Good question. Stick around for maybe one more question here if there's any others. Cool, yeah, so here's another question. Is there a way to clean out duplicate data in Tableau Prep? It's hard to say without seeing the exact data source, but I'm going to venture to say that it's very likely that you can. Without knowing more about the nature of the data, it's hard to say maybe why it's duplicated. If it's duplicated because of a join, what I would try to do is to figure out how to match on unique values. If it's just duplicated because that's the way the data is set up, I might actually consider using something like an aggregation tool to make sure that maybe 2 rows of data end up becoming 1 instead. So I'm going to venture to say yes, there is a high likelihood that you can clean duplicate data with Tableau Prep. All right, and actually here's another one that came in the meantime. Can these transformations be scheduled for automation? Great question. I think that was Christine that came from. Not yet. That's a big hole, I would say, so far. I think that just, this is basically version 1.1, 2018.1 is what they're calling it. So it can't yet. I know that is potentially even priority number 1. So right now, whenever you'd want to update the data, you would need to manually run that flow. But I know that that's coming down the pipe in short order. I'm not really privy to timelines, unfortunately. I wish that I was, and I could tell you exactly when that will be. But I can tell you that will be in as near the future as possible for Tableau's developers. Okay, there's another one. Is it better to connect to a Tableau workbook file or directly to a database for improved performance? Good question. Let me read that one more time. Connect to a Tableau workbook file. So I think probably what you're asking is, does it make more sense maybe to prepare the data in Tableau Prep than in Tableau Desktop? What I would say for that is that Tableau Prep, because of the way that it's built and the processes that are going on in the back end, it will be more efficient than Tableau Desktop at processing data. So if you're looking at, should I do this join in Tableau Desktop or Tableau Prep? If there's no issues with it running slowly or something like that, Tableau Desktop is fine. But if you're running into any sorts of issues with something taking a long time or just the inability to do something in general, then I would recommend Tableau Prep. And if that didn't answer the question, if you're asking, should you do a live connection versus maybe like an extract or something, an extract, or in this case, a .hyper or .tde file is always going to be faster than a live connection. So I think that using this is a good way to ensure that you're going to get the best performance possible. Okay. And oh, here's another one. Okay. Is there a way to share the flows with other users? Yes. So how you can do that right now is you can save your flow as either what's called a TFLX or a TFL. Basically, you can package your data into the flow or not. And so once you save your flow as one of those files, you can send it out to somebody. And as long as they have access to the same data sources that you were working with, they should be able to open up the flow. Let's say these were SQL tables or something, and either run it, or maybe even if they wanted to, for their own purposes, make some modifications to it, then they could do that. Cool. Lots of questions. Appreciate it. Good to hear all of them. All right. So for those of you tried and true warriors that are still here, thank you so much. If anything comes up in the meantime, if you're going back and working with Tableau Prep, just kind of on your own, and anything pops up, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my email right here, eric.parker@onenumber.biz. I'm happy to either help you if it's a possibility to do that kind of quickly, or maybe just point you in the right direction if not. So we'll go ahead and wrap up our time. One last question was, did I record the webinar? Yes, I did. So I will be hopefully getting this uploaded at the end of this week. So also, if you're watching the recording, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk about this in more detail as well. So yeah, thank you so much for everybody that could be here. Really appreciate your attention and your engagement as well, and look forward to being in touch here in the near future.